And so my guess is most of you have done our, what we sort of call the LGBTQ plus 101 training. And so you know about the Center for Children and Youth Justice. In case you have not, we're a nonprofit located in Seattle, but operate statewide, and really with a mission to improve the lives of children and youth in our child welfare and juvenile justice systems and related systems of care. So these are our objectives today, and we're actually going to ask you in a poll question to sort of rate yourself on these objectives, just so we have some idea where folks are at, and other folks can see where their peers are at. So first one, I understand the purpose behind providing clients with the opportunity to discuss their sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. We're just going to use SOGIE from here on out because it's just a lot easier to say than sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression every 2 minutes. Generally, I understand promising practices for discussing SOGIE with clients. And specifically, I understand how to administer the SOGIE questionnaire, including understanding what each question means, how to address challenges, and the administration process. And we'll give you a few seconds to complete that.
Give folks about 10 more seconds.
All right, so on these, the first one, understanding the purpose. So it sounds like over half strongly agree. Actually, this is the highest we've had. So I think over 3/5, over 80% strongly agree or agree on the purpose. So I'm really happy to hear that. I think that's heartening, coming in with a purpose, because I think that's actually, fundamentally what matters most is we understand why we're doing this, and then we can figure out how next. 2, generally, I understand promising practices for discussing SOGIE with clients. So neutral there, and that's really what today is about. It's really the start of a conversation. I don't think we're going to learn everything in 2 hours, but we start the conversation, and we are here for support in implementing this, if you are implementing it. 3, understand how to administer. Also neutral or disagree, and so we will talk more about that. And again, it's also the beginning of a conversation. It does take time to really determine how to administer this. It's actually been a 3-year process. So great. Well, with that, we'll move on to our first lesson. And that is know your why. If you've had a training with me or Lily before, you know that we always start with first lesson is knowing your why, and it's precisely what I just said. Even if we knew how exactly to talk about SOGIE with young folks, it wouldn't matter if we didn't know our why, the purpose behind that. And so we really want to spend some time talking about why are we doing this. And so we'd encourage you to, I'm sorry, this is actually a poll question. Switched it up a little bit from our last training. So we're gonna ask 2 more questions. And then if you'd like to sort of share anything that's come out of this in the chat box, we'd also appreciate that. So it's important to provide clients with the opportunity to discuss their SOGIE, and we're just using clients as a generic term. It's the young people that we serve. And 2, I have experience talking to clients about SOGIE. And then in the chat box, any concerns or questions would be great. maybe just a few more seconds and we'll close this.
Yeah, I'll give folks about 5 more seconds.
All right. So again, sort of mirroring our last question, was strongly agree and agree about 80%. And so with the disagree, hopefully neutral folks will address that. And if we don't by the end of this lesson, then please chime in with questions and whatnot. Because again, I think this is the most importance. And experience, so a lot of neutral, so really all over the place in terms of experience, which really makes sense. This is fairly new in the world of youth services. I know that under the Prison Rape Elimination Act, detention facilities do ask questions about SOGIE. It does seem, in my experience at least, that community providers serving youth experiencing homelessness have probably done this a little bit longer, but in terms of child welfare and juvenile courts, it's still fairly rare to have a sort of instituted program asking about SOGIE. So we understand if folks don't have a lot of experience because it is new. One statistic I heard, and it's a bit old now, so maybe it's changed, but it was 2 years ago, was that there are fewer than 25 probation departments in the entire country asking young people about SOGIE. And so King and Spokane counties are 2 of those. Okay. So if there aren't any other questions or concerns to share, here's one. So from Rich, navigating COVID and how to develop a relationship with a client to administer the questionnaire safely and effectively. Absolutely. And this has been the newest challenge, right, is navigating COVID. And it really is site specific in terms of how to do it. And we'll venture to really address that, but I think it is, again, an ongoing discussion how to best do this. All right, so I'm going to talk about ROI. And one, the first, number one, most important reason is we're better able to connect clients with appropriate resources. And so when we were developing the protocol for safe and affirming care, which is sort of our guiding resource, and hopefully you've been provided that. It's a guideline for youth serving professionals on how to create safer, more affirming spaces for LGBTQ+ youth. And developing that, we consulted a lot of young folks, as well as youth serving professionals. And the most controversial part of this was, should we be talking about SOGIE? Should we be asking those questions? And a lot of folks thought, no, this is private information. We really don't want to ask. And even some youth, many youth, said, this is private information. We don't want to answer. But when we unpack that with youth and we ask them, well, we understand this is private information. It's very sensitive and in many cases, it should be a concern. But say you wanted to be connected with, say, LGBTQ+ community center or support group or any sort of resource specific to your identity, how would the person, your case manager or your probation counselor, social worker, know to connect you to that if they didn't know about your identity? And the response from young people was like, okay, you've got a point there. I guess that is important, but stop asking us about this in conjunction with negative behaviors like drugs use, substance use, those sort of things, because it just furthers the stigmatization. This should be asked in like a kind, respectful manner, where it's like, we want to help you, not this is another bad behavior to add to the list. And so that was really strong feedback. So in the end, we did resolve, and I think we've reached general consensus that it is important to talk about SOGIE with young people, but doing it in a safe and respectful manner. And also, really paying attention to who's doing it. And we're going to talk about some more of those specifics in a bit. Number 2, we demonstrate our commitment to equity when we include SOGIE in our demographic data collection. So the reality is that we will administer this questionnaire, and many youth are not going to talk about, right, their SOGIE. They're still not going to disclose. And that's okay. Because what we're also doing is we're showing we care about these issues as an organization. We're committed to equity for LGBTQ plus people. And that's important to make that statement. It's also important because if that young person is LGBTQ plus, and they hear this, we don't know, they may carry it with them for years and still not disclose, but it is like, they may hold on to that, and that may provide, I'm searching for the term, some sort of sense of comfort or trust building, or you're planting the seed for relationship and trust, even if it doesn't sort of sprout then. You're also demonstrating, right, that you don't make assumptions. So you're talking to all young folks about SOGIE. You're not assuming anything. I think that's really important. And also showing that you're really not afraid to talk about quote unquote taboo subjects. And this really should not be taboo. It should be normalized, because this is a demographic category that everybody has, just like race, ethnicity, national origin, and so on. And Lily, please feel free to jump in if you have anything to add on these. Number 3, and I think that sometimes this one gets pushed to the forefront, and we really resisted pushing it to the forefront, because I know that many of us, especially those in the policy realm and researchers and management, really want data, because we really should have data-driven reforms and data-driven policies. And so this is part of the purpose. We do collect data that in the long run is going to benefit all. It should be LGBTQ plus clients. I'm sorry, that's a slide that was in a sex trafficking specific training that we haven't changed yet. But right, we collect data in the all run that will benefit all LGBTQ plus clients. Right, it's a political reality. There's this old adage, you don't count unless you're counted, right? And we've encountered a number of communities, especially initially, who said, there aren't LGBTQ plus youth in our communities, so why do we need this? And that's simply not true. And you could see that through this sort of healthy schools survey through the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, showing 20 to 30% of young people identifying as LGBTQ plus. This also combats marginalization and builds awareness. Data does that. And we simply don't know what we don't know. And so I think it is important to collect that information. But again, what you'll see is this project that we built doesn't have the best methodology. It's not the best for researchers. It's not the best way to collect data. And that's because we're prioritizing relationship over data. And so we'll collect the data that we can, but we're not going to design a system that prioritizes data. We're going to design a system that prioritizes young people. And finally, our final purpose that really has come out of this is we hold ourselves accountable. So I think in this work, there's really this sort of hierarchy of impact. And it starts maybe with a report. So we started this whole effort with a report called Listening to Our Voices, to Their Voices. And it talked about the experiences of young people in these systems and made recommendations. And I do think some folks read that. Folks read at least the executive summary. We did some presentations on that, and that probably made some impact. But I think I'm just frank in this world, because it happens to me too. Then we get busy and we forget about the report, and it sits on the shelf or in the file cabinet or on the hard drive, and we just sort of forget about it. And so maybe we make more concrete recommendations, and maybe that's a little more helpful because it's maybe one page of like, these are the bullet points of things I need to do. And so that's a little more tangible. But again, there's no support there for carrying out those recommendations. So then we go to maybe training. And so now we help train folks. And I think that's great because it builds on the knowledge of the report. It really sort of spells out more about the recommendations and what to do. And so I think we're making some more movement. And then maybe we offer ongoing training so that we remind folks, we bring people back, there's refreshers, those sort of things. And we found that that's pretty effective too. But what we found is most effective is really when folks administer this questionnaire, because what it does is it really forces us in our day-to-day practice to implement everything that we've learned in the training. So we're practicing day in and day out. And in that way, it serves as an accountability mechanism, making sure that we're putting into practice what we've learned in these trainings. Also just recognizing that it really helps overcome some of these barriers, because the largest barrier we've encountered actually is not on the part of young people, it's actually on the part of us adults, and it's discomfort and paralysis over what to say. Right, this is more practice. Right. All right. So that is our why, the 4 whys that we have. I'll just pause for 1 second. If there are any questions or anything to add. So lesson 2 is, it is our business. So here the quote is, it's easy to fictionalize an issue when you're not aware of the many ways which you're privileged by it. And so what I think has happened is, and I don't mean this as sort of confrontational in any way or insulting, but I think that these systems really, in the most part, have been designed by straight and cisgender people. And straight and cisgender people, I don't think, have as big of awareness of how SOGIE impacts life, because they've been sort of more privileged by their SOGIE. So their sexual orientation and gender identity has been the predominant, it's been what people assumed it is, and so they're not really paying attention. Just like I, as a white person, didn't, and probably still don't, really fully understand the impact of race on someone's life, right? Because I'm in the dominant group. And not to compare racism and heterosexism, but it's about that awareness, because when you're in the sort of more privileged group, you're not necessarily aware of how these different factors might impact someone. So I think it's been a fiction throughout these years to say, well, SOGIE is none of our business. We shouldn't be asking about it. It's not part of our work, because SOGIE very much, as you hopefully have learned in our previous training, really does impact the experiences of young people. It is really important to their lives. And so it is important for us to understand it if we're going to support those young people. But we want to make a big sort of really reinforce this, that it is not the time, if you haven't done the pre-work, to start asking about these. We have to do it in a safe manner. And that means doing the work ahead of time. It means taking LGBTQ+ trainings, displaying visual indicators, so creating a safer space. It takes, consider the setting. Where am I going to ask this? Who is going to ask it? When are we going to ask it in the process? Really thinking about these carefully. The feedback from young people has been, we want to talk to someone that we're going to have a relationship, that we're going to trust. And so that's really important. But then of course, there's also this reality is like, the sooner we get this sort of information, the better placement decisions we can make, the better sort of earlier we can connect to services. So we're dealing with that tension as well. It's really important to know your available LGBTQ+ resources, because if you ask them, right, what's your SOGIE, and they tell you, hey, I'm part of the LGBTQ+ community, right, there should be a reason for you asking that, and I want to be connected to resources, so knowing that. And we recognize that there are more resources in some places than others, but Lily's been doing a great job of mapping those, collecting resources, and she'll talk about that. And there are some virtual resources, and then sometimes that is what we have to do, especially for our rural partners. And then, of course, really, have a plan to adapt to circumstances like COVID, where we're having to change the way that we interact with everybody.
I just want to quickly touch on this idea of considering the setting, especially since we have a lot of child welfare folks here today. And my personal experience in child welfare, when SOGIE never came up, I had this really wonderful social worker but it never came up for me personally because she never saw me alone. She always saw me with my brother. So it was never an opportunity for me to be able to talk about, this conflict that I was having internally in my placement, because I never felt comfortable enough to like open up to her because of the family circumstance. But then also, I just also want to say too, I've had some of the most deeply personal conversations that like really impacted my life in a McDonald's, right? Like I just really can't emphasize enough that like the place and spaces that we choose to have these conversations with young people really do stick with them. So being really conscientious of environment, especially when we're talking about deeply personal things like SOGIE. And like really getting their consent. Like, is this place okay? Like, I see that the conversation is turning to something serious. Like, is this an okay place to be? That kind of practice and really internalizing that.
Thanks, Lily. Absolutely. So getting into talking about sexual orientation and gender identity with all youth, we're going to talk about why it must be all youth. Just a quick highlight that there is a section on this in the protocol for safe and affirming care. It starts on page 31, and so that's just to let you know that it is there. And so now I'm going to go through some of the guidelines that are in the protocol. And I also say that this protocol is now 4 years old, and so we are discussing, this is definitely needed for an update because we've learned a lot since then. So we are working on that, but I think these still all remain true. Number one is ask all individuals, right? If we only ask young people who we think are LGBTQ plus about their SOGIE, then we are making assumptions, right? And we're sort of precluding all those other young people, right, to be able to talk about these identities, right? And so that's really, we just want to emphasize, ask all individuals. It's okay, I think, because this is something new to, for example, limit it to a unit within your agency or court. So, we've had in the beginning, back when there was adolescent units, it was the adolescent unit that did this. So it was all youth within that adolescent unit. So it's okay, I think, to break down by units, or some folks have done age groups and say, well, we don't feel like we're equipped to talk to young children about this, so we're going to do 12 and up. And we've supported that, understanding where they're coming from there. But it's all youth who are 12 and up. So just making sure that we're not making assumptions. Number two, provide the purpose. So it's, again, purpose is everything. And talking to young people, this is why we're going to talk about this, I think is that sets the situation. It says, I'm talking to you about this so that I can connect you with resources and help you. And that's really important, rather than the sort of stigmatized ways that young people talked about in the past, in conjunction with all these negative behaviors.
We also just want to say too that we have gotten feedback in the past that like by saying that though, the young person then thinks that like, oh, like I have to provide an answer in order to get resources, and that's like not true. So like really making that clear that like information is voluntary, and that does not like predetermine like what resources like we will and will not give you, right?
Thank you, Lily. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, so much of this is really nuanced, and I think really it comes on the delivery, and that's really important. 3, ensure understanding of right to decline and confidentiality parameters. So this, right, young people can complete the entire survey, they can complete, decline the entire survey, they can answer some questions and not others. I think this is really important to let the young person take the lead on what they want to answer, and ensure, right, that there are no repercussions for not answering. It's okay. They'll still be connected to services, still get that service. You'll still help them. And also the ability to revisit it, let them know that they can come back to it. 4, we talked about this, do not ask in conjunction with questioning about negative behaviors. That just furthers the stigma. This really should be, I think, talked about in the context of other demographic categories, because it is a demographic category, and by adding it to our demographics, right, I think we normalize it and take away the stigma. 5, designate the appropriate person to ask. So again, pretty consistent feedback from young people is they'd want someone that they have, are building a relationship with, building trust with. That said, right, we want information as soon as possible so we can connect to appropriate services, make appropriate placement decisions, those sort of things. So in some sites, this is really differed by sites. We've had, some people at intake, they've done it at intake, and some, I'm thinking of one, we have a CHET screener, I think, and I think it's Child Health Education. I always forget the acronym, but within child welfare, it's sort of who does the initial upfront sort of assessment. And they just have this way and rapport, this person I'm thinking of. And so they are the appropriate person, I think, in their agency to ask, even though it is an upfront person and not someone that's going to have an ongoing relationship. So I think it does depend on the context. In a couple other sites, they offered the questionnaire at intake, knowing that they want that information. And then when young people were assigned a probation counselor, then that probation counselor revisited it. 6, ask in a private setting. Lily touched on this. So, as an attorney, I cringed every time they're having very private conversations in busy courtroom halls. And so really trying to avoid that, not asking this in front of parents or caregivers. I mean, often that's a source of conflict there, or other family members, like a brother, like Lily mentioned. So that's really important, I think, that the young person be alone when you initiate this conversation. Provide write-in options. So there's an ever-increasing vocabulary for identities that have always existed. Folks use different words in different ways. Young people, I think all people really want the ability to define themselves. And so I think it's really important to, offer some of the more common identities in the checkbox, which you'll see, but also offer the write-in option always. And then there is, and we're going to talk more about this because there are some concerns, but using a 2-step question for gender identity. So regardless of whether I'm transgender or cisgender, I might just say I identify as a man. And that, right, doesn't get us the information in terms of like, if I'm transgender, because then I might have unique needs and need unique supports and resources. And so asking about sex assigned at birth and gender identity indicates to us, tells us who, if someone is transgender by this definition there, and whether, we might need to pay attention to extra supports and resources. All right, and please, again, feel free to jump in with questions on the chat, or privately chatted to Lily is helpful too, because I know I'm doing a lot of talking. Additional guidance, just reemphasizing, it is not safe to assume. And it still comes up even after trainings, folks go, well, I think I just want to do this questionnaire with my LGBTQ plus youth. And it's really well-meaning, but again, then you're making an assumption about who are your LGBTQ plus youth, and they're, your quote unquote straight youth or cisgender youth. They may be LGBTQ plus, and you're now completely like leaving them out of the mix and not connecting them with resources. And maybe some of your LGBTQ plus youth aren't LGBTQ plus, so right, and they haven't had the opportunity to really talk about who they are. Use terms as adjectives as opposed to nouns. So what this is getting at is, again, I think just a lot of folks are frankly afraid of saying the wrong thing. And I'm just level with folks. I think it is difficult. The sort of rules around language and what is offensive, or what's a better way to say things, does change over time. Terms that used to be sort of commonly accepted are now considered pretty offensive. And reverse, so the reverse, queer, which used to be a pretty derogatory term, is now actually increasingly used as an affirmative, positive identity. But one couple general rules, I think, is one way to I think to sound, to come across better is to use these terms as adjectives as opposed to nouns. I think it's a more respectful way to say it. So here's an example. He is gay. Here, gay is used in an adjective, and if that person is gay, then there's nothing offensive about that sentence. But he is a gay. Here, gay is used as a noun. Well, that just, one, it sounds a little bit awkward. He is a gay, also sort of suggests that he's also nothing else. It doesn't really recognize the holistic approach, right? Because he's a gay. And I just generally think it's not received as well. So, and just talking about this, if you use it as adjectives, I think it's just safer. Another sort of rule, which we generally try to abide by, although sometimes in language it gets really wordy, is use people first language. If you really want to be careful, a person who is gay, right, is a person experiencing homelessness rather than a homeless person, right, is also considered generally more respectful. Another just very common mistake is it's transgender and not transgendered, and I could go into the grammatical reasons, but really transgender is the appropriate term. That's the way that is an adjective. And then really, again, allow individuals to define themselves. So familiarize yourself with terms, but understand that they will be used in different ways. Any questions here? Or Lily, do you have any additional guidance or comments on that? Okay. All right, so now we are moving into the questionnaire portion of this, and so you should have received that as a handout. So you might want to hold that up as a reference. You don't need to, but just really breaking down the informed consent elements, because we want to make sure that young people have informed consent, meaning they're fully aware of what's going on, and then giving you a decision based on that awareness.
Quickly, Nicholas, I just wanted to say, for DCYF folks, you have a specific version of the informed consent. So your handout says DCYF version. And for service providers who are on this call, these are folks who maybe work in juvenile justice, community organizations. You have a different version of the informed consent.
Thank you. And that's just an important point is, right, every agency, every court is different. And so in the context of DCYF, there were a few different applicable laws. And so we customized the informed consent to those laws. You may need that. And so that's something we can help with if it's necessary. So the first part of informed consent is giving the purpose. Why are you collecting this information? And we are transparent. We say both, it's to connect you to appropriate resources, but also we will be collecting data that in the long run, we hope will help all LGBTQ+ young people. So they know that both things are happening here. Really outlining the procedure. So what's the process for collecting this information? So, I might say, I'm gonna talk to you about it now, and I will give this to our LGBTQ+ lead or our lead in the office, and they're gonna share it with CCYJ, but it won't be shared anywhere else there. Or, you can complete it now, but if you ever want to change, you can always come back and we can change this. Privacy parameters, how will this information be used? Who will see it? This is, I think, very important. Please don't overpromise. Like if other folks are going to see it, then let them know. And so in our initial pilot that we implemented with this, it was really the probation counselor and then the lead in the office, and then they shared it with CCYJ. And then CCYJ shared the sort of de-identified information in the aggregate. Risk, okay, so what are the risks? What can be done to mitigate them? This includes both, emotional risk, but then any other risks, presumably, maybe someone could find the sheet, or maybe it's stored or something like that. So I'm addressing that. What else do I need to know? And then consent, how is consent documented? And so with our pilot sites, we opted not to have a signature because that can be identifying in some ways. So we ask our partners to make sure that young people are clear that by completing this out, they're consenting to it. So, but that they do have the right not to. So that's where we landed there. This is just this is the sheet. This is the screenshot that you got, the example there. And it's an iterative process. We are continually improving. We did do a lot of work on this latest version, so we're going to try the version we have, but that does not mean that we're not open in the future to changing this. And certainly, individual agencies reports, if they have stuff to add, should be adding it, that are specific to their unique situation.
Alex, I see that your mic is off or on. Do you have a question by chance?
Oh, nope, sorry. I accidentally hit it.
No, you're good. Just wanted to make sure.
All right. So we're going to move into the questions, actually. Some of the feedback was that folks wanted to keep this short. There are a number of assessment intakes. We are very conscious of the fact that just a lot of paperwork, and it's a lot for young people, frankly, to fill out. And so we don't want to add too much more. We kept this short to 1 page, 10 questions. Note that this was collected separately from any other data. So for example, you might have a database where you enter all sorts of information. It has the youth name, and it might track certain outcomes like education, housing, if you're a community service provider, where are the youth at with these things? Or if you're probation, length of probation, length of detention stays, or placement changes and the child welfare. I'm just thinking sort of examples there. And it's not connected to any of that, at least in our initial sites. Is completely separate, and that was to protect the privacy of young people knowing that this is a pilot. So that being said, we could not sort of cross-compare data. We couldn't say, number of placements and then break that down by LGBTQ plus youth. It just wasn't possible. But we did want to track a few things. And one was overlap with race, ethnicity, and one was overlap with involvement in other systems. And so that's why these questions are added to the SOGIE questionnaire, so that we can see, for example, if LGBTQ plus youth of color are disproportionately represented, which the national data shows, or are LGBTQ plus youth, disproportionately experiencing homelessness, which again, the national data shows. And so eventually when we have a statistically significant sample, we'll be able to weigh in on those questions. So Lily and I will switch off on these questions and just talking about them. The first one is age, and that's pretty simple, we skip that. Question number 2 is pronouns. And so the top box here is a cutout from the actual questionnaire. And you'll see that we've provided some of the most frequently used pronouns, which are she, her, hers, he, him, his, they, them, theirs. Again, provided a write-in space, provided a box that says, I don't know, provided a box that says, I don't know what this means, meaning like, I don't know what the question is asking, and then prefer not to answer, or they could not answer by just not answering at all. One way I think that is easy to do this is just really start with yourself and just say, hi, my name is Nicholas, I use he, him pronouns. Do you have words that you use to describe yourself? And then the second box below here is from the guide, which you should have also received. And so that just is further explanation. This isn't meant to be private only for the professional. It's not meant to be only for the youth. This is something you could share with the young people, right? It just explains more about the question. So it's asking pronouns, presents that, it provides basically the definition. They can be used in place of your name. And so that's question number 2, which I think is pretty straightforward. And you will see on all of these, again, the write-in, I don't know what this means, and prefer not to answer as options.
There's also the check all that apply box. That's
you.
actually very important. So if a young person is like, I use she, her, he, him, they, them pronouns, it's like, yeah, great, check all of those. You're welcome to do that. So just remember that the check all apply box is important too.
Thank you, Lily. That's really important, right? Yeah, we don't limit the answers of young people either. And that is true on most of these questions. And if not, then we'll explain why.
So question number 4 relates to sexual orientation. And again, this the reason why we say I am is because this was feedback from young people when we were first creating this questionnaire. It used to be like, what is your sexual orientation? And young people were like, well, that doesn't feel like authentic. It's more about like who I am. So, and again, the category or the words or the terms that we have put on here are kind of the most common that we're seeing. Again, there is a larger expansive vocabulary out there, which is why we always provide a write-in option. But for young people, we've offered the identity of straight, gay or lesbian, bisexual, asexual, pansexual, queer, not listed above, please write in. I don't know / questioning, I don't know what this means and prefers not to answer. So I don't know what this means is like I'm not sure what a sexual orientation is. And versus like I don't know, as in like I've kind of thought about like my sexual orientation, but I'm not really like sure what it is, right? And then prefer not to answer is always acceptable if a young person's like, I don't want to disclose. And then again, the quick and easy definitions below is that guide. Really the biggest update that we've had, folks should know this from yesterday's training, is the definition of bisexual and pansexual. And so those are the main 2 things that have changed in this questionnaire if you've taken trainings with us before. Yeah, I'm trying to think. Okay, that's all I have. You can go ahead and go to the next one.
Great. So I just also adding, we've had questions from partners about, to what extent should I be educating youth about these terms? And I really think that's an individualized determination. We're not asking necessarily for you to educate youth to like come up with an answer. It's just to capture the answer if they do have one. And if they don't, then we'll just capture that they don't have an answer. Other partners, I think, do feel like their role is more educational, and they are willing and think it's appropriate to talk more about these terms and maybe have more of a conversation. And I think that's okay too. So I think that just really thinking about that and what your boundaries are and your role and what's appropriate there is important.
I also think it's entirely appropriate if a young person is like, what does this mean, to like answer, because I think in that way they're opening up in terms of trust. Like that's a point of trust for you. So I wouldn't fear answering a young person's question if they aren't sure what a term is. But I do echo Nicholas's sentiment in that you have to make that determination for yourself in your boundary.
Yeah, I was mainly talking about thank you, Lily, about going beyond the guide in terms of like expanding more beyond that. We do provide the guide, and I think you could happily share the guide with the young person, but if there's more questions beyond that, then it may or may not be your role to sort of do that. But I do think it is the role, if you're not there, to connect youth with appropriate resources or tools to do that. Question number 5, gender identity. So again, like the other questions, we've listed some of the most commonly used identities here. It's all that apply. Again, there's writing and the don't know sort of options there, and then I've listed down here. It's really important, I think, to understand, again, whether someone is transgender or cisgender, they may not identify themselves as such. They may say, I'm a boy, I'm a man, I'm a girl, I'm a woman, and that's okay. And so we wouldn't want to say, well, you also need to mark transgender or cisgender. It is up to them. It's how they identify. I would say, increasingly, folks are identifying as non-binary, or maybe it's not increasing, but I'm seeing it more in my experiences. So I think that's a very common one. And queer, I think, is also very common. I think a lot of folks like it because it indicates they're part of the community, but doesn't necessarily say exactly how. So again, provided some definitions. Of course, folks use different words in different ways. And so This is our best attempt at definitions, but again, they might be different for other people. You might see slight variances in these as well.
Number 6 relates to gender expression, which, frankly, is one of the hardest things to ask as we were going through this questionnaire. So this turned into a qualitative data statement. So we're really left it as a fill in the blank. So my gender expression is, and then we give the definition. And then we provide some examples, and it truly is a fill in the blank. So it is whatever the young person signifies as their gender expression. In addition to this, though, we do at the end of this training send out a longer list of like different gender expressions, because I think that this is like the biggest thing that like young people weren't really sure about. So again, we're just very curious. So this is kind of the sky's the limit in terms of how young people respond. And it's okay not to know either. It's okay if it's, I wear, baggy clothes or, that kind of thing. We're just kind of curious. So that's this question.
Yeah, and it really goes back again, I think, to the Prison Rape Elimination Act, where I think there was a good intention there was to sort of ask, does this person conform to societal expectations of gender? It's a really hard question, but it is important because if they do not, right, then their safety could be impacted. And I think that's just a reality. And so it is important to understand that. My understanding was that in PREA, that at least part of the way of doing that was having the professional actually make that determination, which seems to me not the best way to do it. I don't know though, to have someone else judge. And so we're really trying to ask the youth about, what their expression is. And hopefully coming from that, seeing if there's any either problems or strengths that come out of that. Because both are possible, I think. Okay, so question number 7, sex assigned at birth. So this has been, I'm just going to be transparent. We spent 3 years developing this questionnaire. We vetted it with countless organizations, young folks. There was, wide consensus that this was a good questionnaire. It's increasingly accepted. And I would say not until recently have folks, we've heard feedback, we don't like this question. We think it's invasive, that it could actually cause dysphoria for someone, for example, who's non-binary and then has to report that, a binary sex marker. And we certainly can appreciate those concerns. And certainly no one should be made to complete this question. And I think with all questions have the potential, this is part of those risks, to give rise to something in a young person, right? To be problematic. So the approach, how you approach the SOGIE questionnaire is very important. But I really want to talk about, why we're doing this, why we think it's important. And I've been thinking about how to explain this. And it's one of the best ways I think is I use 2 terms, truth and reality. And so let me talk about truth. So a young person's truth may be that they are non-binary, that their male or female marker does not matter, and it's not part of them. Or a transgender person may say, I'm a man and that's what I am. I don't need to mark transgender. And we can certainly appreciate that. But as a lawyer, one of my jobs was really to break down the hard reality with young folks. And the reality is that, if was assigned female at birth and I identify as a man, my truth could be that I'm a man, right? But the reality is that I was assigned female at birth. My gender identity is different than my sex assigned at birth. And that does have impact, or it can have impact in the world. And that we should be paying attention to that impact and try to mitigate any negative impact there. So I think it is important in many cases to understand when someone's gender identity does not align with their sex assigned at birth because of the realistic sort of impact or consequences of that. I mean, it's just a cruel reality that transgender folks are subject to violence because of that very fact, that their sex assigned at birth does not align with their gender identity. And we want to do everything we can to prevent that. But again, it's up to the young person to answer any of these questions, and especially this question. Lily, did you have anything to add? Because I know you've talked with a lot of our partners about this.
Yeah, and I will just speak, I mean, I'm speaking from this, I'm not a non-binary person, I'm a cisgender human. So like, but I do understand that going through these systems, there's a lot of like stuff happening to you. And I do think that, you know, in a way, if you're approaching this with that mindset and with that intentionality and with that like understanding of like, I'm going to respect your identity, but these systems in a lot of ways are not built to do that. I think that that's going to help build trust with that young person a lot more than, I think being real with them is going to help build trust. And I think that that's really important because that is something that a lot of young people going through these systems don't get is realness about the realities of the system that they're about to face or that are facing. So, my tidbit of advice is just to be very, very proactive around that conversation and holding space for that conversation. And also to really sit with them in that injustice, right? Because in a lot of ways, it's not fair. It's not fair that they have to go through the child welfare system. It's not fair. It's not fair at all. So sitting with that injustice with them, I think is going to be important too.
Excellent, absolutely. And you will notice that this section, right, this question does not have check all that apply. And the reason is that there is a reality that there are only 2 sex markers on birth certificates. You can, as a young adult or adult, change to a gender neutral marker, but that again is not on the actual original birth certificate. We've also added the question intersex here because we think it relates most closely to sex. And it's please indicate if you identify or were identified as intersex. And really that's a yes or no question. Were you identified or do you identify or were you not? So that's again why there aren't a lot of options. And I suspect we do have had some folks identify as such, but it's not very common. And I don't think it's common for many people maybe to know that they are even. So let me move on. All right, Lily.
Great, so this one is question number 8. This is systems involvement. And so this is, have you experienced any of the following? Homelessness on my own, homelessness with my family, foster care, child welfare, CPS, juvenile justice, none of the above, and other system, please describe. So this is actually the one question that we've told providers that they can actually override. We've had a lot of young people, especially in juvenile justice facilities, say that they haven't experienced juvenile justice. And I think that this is a good opportunity for the provider to be like, oh, this is the system that you're currently experiencing, not to stigmatize, but to give language back to a situation that a young person isn't aware of. And I think that that is really important because, again, as someone who's gone through the system, there's a lot of things happening to you and not a lot of things being explained to you. So this is an opportunity if you do have a young person who's like, oh no, I've never experienced any of that. And then you being their caseworker being like, well, actually, this is what foster care is. This is what CPS is. This is what you're experiencing now, giving them language, if you would. Yeah, so that's that. And that is check all that apply. And we've had some people mark, you know, none of the above, but like couch surfing, right? And those things all really do are count, right? Like if a young person is not living in their current home, or if they're involved in that in a system, that is something that we're curious about. But again, it's up to them in terms of how much disclosure they want to provide.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, noting, I imagine folks really know this, working in these systems, is that some of this, or all of it potentially, really carries a stigma with it. And so again, it's the way that you approach this question, and it's not just to sort of further stigmatize someone, but really to be able to help them. So I just think that's really important. So our last one that we're going to review is comfort. So this is comfort in the system. And we're just trying to get at, right, our first iteration of this, we asked, are you comfortable in the current system, the system in which you're being questioned? And it just didn't really work well. And perhaps these young people didn't want to be critical of the system, critical of their probation when they're sitting across from their probation counselor, which makes sense. But we still think it's an important question to sort of understand youth and where they feel most comfortable and where they feel least comfortable. So we just sort of opened it up more. It's sort of an open-ended question for young people. I think there is some potential, some risk that this could trigger a mandatory report, the least comfortable section. I'm least comfortable here because I'm experiencing abuse here. So that's, I think, important to note, and important for the young person to know, the consequences of their disclosures. And so just to note that, we haven't had anything like that come up, but I just think it is a potential risk there. But we actually anticipate being surprised by these answers. And it's in our first iteration, question 10 is about, other resources you want to be connected to, which I think is pretty simple and straightforward. But the feedback has been, some people have never been asked that before, which is just sort of amazing that they haven't been asked what they want to be connected to. And so this question, in a similar vein, is providing that open-ended question so that they could say anything. Because on that question 10, on those resources, our partners are reported being surprised. And that's from straight and cisgender youth too, that they're opening up about what they need. And in some cases with, for example, faith needs. So it's not something we talk a lot about, but it is something that is important to a lot of young people, including LGBTQ plus young people. All right, so that was a lot. We've been talking directly at you for an hour. So we just want to take a pause and reflect. And so here's a couple of discussion questions. And just trying to get your perspective on these questions. What do you think is frankly going to be the easiest task, and what's going to be the most challenging? And then our next slide is going into questions. So if you're done with that and you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. So there's no option to say all of the above or none of the above. Well, the none of above would be, I guess our approach from there is to check all that apply, so that someone literally could check all of them. I suppose we could look into adding a box for all of the above. Part of this, frankly, is just a very practical thing about space on the page, and adding other boxes. And then none of the above. Really, I think this comes down to training. We really would like our partners to be very clear, like you can check all these or none of them, and really emphasize that. But I agree, in an ideal world, we'd have those other additional options, and we could look into the space on that. So maybe a few more seconds on the discussion questions. And then again, any questions in the chat, we're happy to address.
Give folks about 10 more seconds. Okay, we're going to go ahead and end the poll.
Okay, so this is pretty consistent with other results. Youth's pronouns, the plurality are most comfortable asking that. I think that is a more and more common question, more and more common thing that we do, so that makes sense to me. For the 5% who'd say youth gender expression, that is a new one. I don't know if anyone said gender expression is what they're most comfortable, but I'm really curious. And if you have done that and want to email us later or whatnot, we'd love to get insight, because this typically is the one that folks struggle with the most. But actually, that's not the poll here is sexual orientation. So a third would be the most challenging, and gender expressions, just 14%. So that's actually a little atypical from what I've seen in other polls. So if folks have questions about these, are especially the sexual orientation, because that's come up the most, feel free to put that in the chat box, or send a private message to Lily, and she can pose the question anonymously.
Yeah, I'm also curious about youth sexual orientation. I think that, there is a perception about maybe invasiveness. I'm also curious if, sexual orientation feels heavy in the sense of like, I wonder if that's being confused with like sexual activity. So I'm just curious if people who clicked use sexual orientation can maybe elaborate a little bit more. And you're welcome to have that anonymity. Again, like Nicholas said, please feel free to message me. But I'm just curious if we can unpack that a little bit more as a group.
Any thoughts? So I used to be a middle school teacher, and I was trained to like just sit with uncomfortable silence, but it's still hard to do. So here, I feel like the other questions are about them personally, while sexual orientation can include other people, which feels more intimate. Mm-hmm. Interesting. That is a good point. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point, Bethany. Yeah, and I also just think about, though, like in terms of rapport, though, like I think about like a lot of direct service that I was given, as well as a direct service provider. There's kind of a natural point where you ask about a youth's life, right? Like you ask about them. And one of the ones that I got a lot was like, like, are you interested in any boys, right? And I think that question in a lot of ways is very related to asking about a sexual orientation, right? We're more comfortable asking that question than we are asking, what is your sexual orientation? But these kinds of questions still come out in our direct service, right? And youth pick up on that. Youth pick up on that, like, oh, this person's trying to build rapport with me in this way. They're trying to get to know my life. But especially if you're working with like a queer young person who maybe doesn't fit the way the question is being answered, it can actually not build trust, right? So I think in a lot of ways that we really do ask these questions like sexual orientation in the way that we build rapport with people. But maybe this questionnaire is looking at it from a different angle. And if you have a way that's like, that feels more authentic to the way that you do service delivery, and like, this is like, the kinds of people that you're interested in, right? That you might want to date, right? That's an entirely appropriate question, I think, to ask, because I think in a lot of ways that's something that we do as service providers anyway. It's just reframing it. That's a great point. Thank you, Bethany.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely agree. And any of these really have the potential to be really intimate. And it's it's okay to also expect, and you know, we've done focus groups with young folks experiencing homelessness, and LGBTQ plus young folks experiencing homelessness, and sexual orientation, gender identity didn't come up, you know, at all in one group. That was not their primary concern. Primary concern was getting basic needs met, like food and housing, and you know, from their perspective, not being harassed by law enforcement came up a lot, and so that was more important to them. And so on this questionnaire, they could just not answer because it's not something that's important to them. They don't want to be connected at that time to resources with related to their sexual orientation, and that's okay. So I just really want to emphasize it's okay for there not to be answers, because again, our primary purpose is not data collection. It is great when we get the data, but it's that burden that should not be put on that individual youth to make sure that we get the right data. It's about them and helping them with their health, safety, and wellness.
Right. And we did have a comment come in through the through direct message, so I'm just quickly going to read that. One thing I've noticed with working with teens that come from trauma is that they can sometimes be stuck in an age or time much younger than their chronological age. For example, I have a 14-year-old who was so embarrassed to have these conversations and didn't know that what many of the terms meant. I am comfortable with the SOGIE questionnaire as well as working with teens, but I feel this is potentially an uncomfortable situation for workers who are themselves uncomfortable with SOGIE. And absolutely, like I do think that that's a very, very valid concern. And I think that that's why you, in that situation, you defer to your expertise. If you feel like it's inappropriate to do the SOGIE questionnaire with that young person, that's fine. And it's also entirely up to you to decide how much you want to work with that young person. I will say that from my experience in care, that my direct service provider was my link to a lot of my understanding about these things, because my biological parent was out of my life and my kinship provider, or like my placement, was not providing me any of this, right? So I think it's also about like, does the youth want to know more and they're embarrassed? Or is it a manner of like the youth is embarrassed and they don't want to know more, right? Because if it's a manner of like the youth wants to know more and they feel flustered that they don't, that's maybe an opportunity for you to talk about these things a little bit more. But if it is the youth that's like, no, I'm not talking about this at all, then that's fine. You don't have to approach that conversation with them at all. Because again, you're the expert in terms of like how the case management is going to go, right? So in this case, it would make sense. But you do also raise a really good point about how this idea of discomfort, especially if they're a service provider who's uncomfortable, like young people pick up on that. So if you are that person who's uncomfortable, really make that boundary for yourself. Or, you know, find a person who's a little bit more comfortable that youth can potentially talk to, because young people will pick up on that. Yeah, thank you. I just saw the follow-up comment, thank you. Okay, are there any other questions? This is kind of the bread and butter of how to, so please feel free to jump in and have this conversation with us. We really want to go there with you all today.
So, and please, again, follow up with questions while I'm talking here, but I just wanted to set this up. So Lily and one of our partners at DCYF filmed a video. So this is sort of the role play of going through this questionnaire, and Lily's going to lead us through sections of that. We don't have the best editing software yet, so we don't have a fancy edited video yet. We hope to have one, but I think it is really helpful to just sort of see it in action, and that may spur other questions as well. So Lily, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Great, thanks, Nicholas. So we're getting into the part of the rest of the training where we're going to be practicing, as well as kind of looking at an example. So in this example, Nicholas, if you could stop sharing your screen, that would be lovely, so I can share mine. So in this example, myself and Day, who works at DCYF HQ and is actually the point person that you all will be turning in your SOGIE questionnaires to. Why can't this move? That's weird. It's not moving. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing this for a second and I'm gonna move this to my other screen so that I can actually see it. Okay, here we go. So I can see you all. Alrighty. Okay, so so this is, can everyone see that? You can indicate yes, no in the chat. I just want to make sure folks can see that. Okay, great. So in this part, this is a video. Day and I actually, thank you, Mariah. Day and I actually walk through the SOGIE questionnaire together. For context, Day is my social worker. I based this reenactment off of one of the profiles that you all received for the next activity. I based this off of SAGE as well as my own personal lived experience. And so what you won't see is kind of the beginning of our check-in, which is I'm staying at a friend's house. I'm not with mom. I'm on, this kind of trial return home thing, and it's not really working out. A lot of the contention is around stuff related to LGBTQ stuff. And so this is a check-in between me and Day, and just kind of a little bit giving more background around the struggles. This video is about 10 minutes long, so go ahead and buckle in. And again, I will just keep in mind what you like, because we will revisit this when it's done. And so with that, I'm gonna go ahead and press play.
I mean, she doesn't accept me for who I am, and that's why I'm not there. I mean, really the only person in my family who's supportive of me right now is my brother. And I think this whole thing is really hard because I can't see him in this situation. And I also just am having a really hard time because I don't want to talk to my mom, but I also kind of want a relationship with her. And it's just, I don't know. Quarantine is kind of an excuse not to talk to her. But it's also just really hard because it just feels like she doesn't accept me for who I am. And yeah, that's why I'm here with my friend.
Yeah. Sounds like there's a lot of internal kind of conflict, or just, and again, I don't know if conflict might be too strong of a word, but like you said, you want to have a relationship with your mom, and yet she's having a hard time accepting who you are, and you're wrestling also with developing and exploring who you are. And
just figuring out. Yeah, I'm just figuring out what the heck I'm gonna do. I don't know what I'm gonna. I just there's a lot of uncertainty, and I don't know what I'm gonna do, and it's kind of a lot. So
yeah. So, and resources are going to be important for you to have. I'm going to segue a little bit here, if that's okay with you, because what you're sharing with me aligns with some of the things that we're working on right now at work, and how we can have better resources for all of our kids, but especially for our LGBTQ plus kiddos.
okay.
Would you be okay if I asked you some questions about that so that we can help build resources and talk about maybe the resources you need or the ones that I can help you access?
Yeah, what is it exactly? And who's gonna see it?
Sure, totally. So I'm gonna email a copy of this to you. Click. And what you'll see is that there's an informed consent form, and we can look at it. There's a lot of words on this piece of paper, so I'm gonna try to hit the highlights, right? So the purpose of it is to collect information and support that you already have and ones that you need based on your SOGIE. So I think SOGIE is a term you're familiar with.
It's related to queer stuff, right?
Totally. So it's an acronym. It's sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression.
Oh, okay.
And we'll talk about those a little bit more, right? And it takes us about 5 to 10 minutes to complete. And then the biggest part of the informed consent I'm just going to scroll down here with you, is the privacy piece, right? So we know that information for you is incredibly personal and private. So the department is sharing here, and it's backed up by an RCW, which is a law that says that we will not share your information if you think any harm, either physical or emotional harm, will come to you should that information be shared. And that it might be like it will be shared with our partner agency, the Center for Children and Youth Justice, but we'll take out all of your identifying information. So your name's not going to be on it or anything. It's just going to be the information that you shared. So we can look at what all of the young people who are completing it are telling us, and if there's patterns or things that we need to pay attention to.
Okay.
Does that feel okay? So that's, I think that's, for me, the really critical part, right? And you can stop it at any time. If you don't want to answer a question, you can totally be like, pass, or next time we meet, if you're like, hey, I want to go back and change that, we can totally do that also. And just all of your answers are going to be confidential. Does that feel okay to you?
Yeah, that feels good to me. I mean, I have the right to like stop in the middle if I am uncomfortable. Okay.
Absolutely. Anytime. You can also be like, I'm going to pass on this question. What's the next one? Just so there's only 9 questions. So it's super easy to get through. I'm sorry, there's 10 questions.
Oh, okay.
There's 10 questions. All right. And I'm just going to ask you things that I may or may not know. But I'm just going to need to ask all of them as they're written. So the first one is, how old are you?
I am 16 years old.
Okay. And which pronouns do you use, or which pronouns best describe yourself?
I use she, her, and they, them pronouns.
Okay, perfect. If it helps, those are the ones that I use also.
Yeah. So yeah, it does help.
Good. I'm glad I shared that with you, in case you didn't already know. And the next question is asking about your race and ethnicity. I should have told you, these are all you can see they're all
multiple choice.
That's what I want. Multiple choice, thank you. So we can read them out loud, or and I don't know what this means and prefer not to answer, as always a response. So this is about your race and ethnicity. We have African American, Black, Asian, American Indian, Alaska Native, Hispanic or Latino, Latina or Latinx, Caucasian or white, Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander, not listed. I don't know what this means and prefer not to answer.
I would say white.
Okay, great. And the next one is related to your sexual orientation. The choices are straight, gay or lesbian, bisexual, asexual, pansexual, queer, not listed, I don't know, questioning, I don't know what this means, or prefer not to answer.
Okay. Like when I first came out, I was lesbian, and then I thought I was bisexual, but I think I'm like landing more on being pansexual and queer. I don't know if can I check multiple? Cool.
Absolutely.
Let's go queer and pansexual.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Number 5 is about your gender identity. So that's about how you feel. The options are a boy, man, a girl, woman, transgender, queer, cisgender, non-binary, not listed, I don't know, questioning, I don't know what this means, and prefer not to answer.
What does cisgender mean?
So cisgender, if I break it down, cis is CIS means the same, and that's when your sex assigned at birth is the same gender that you identify with. So if I use myself as an example, I was female assigned at birth, and I identify as female, so I'm cisgender female, or cis for short, which is different than trans. So trans means to change. So if I was female assigned at birth and I identified as male, I would be a transgender male. If that helps to see the difference.
Yeah, that does help. I was just getting tripped up on the cis part. Thanks for that.
Yeah, it's a new term. It's a newer term.
I think I definitely like. I feel like I'm more of a woman, but I'm also like still kind of exploring that.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say like woman questioning.
Sure.
Yeah.
So we can definitely check off girl, woman, and I don't know, we're questioning. And there's another term in here, non-binary, which talks about maybe another term could be like gender fluid or gender non-conforming. And that's when somebody's exploring or identifies more of either a blend of the multiple genders or doesn't specifically align with one specific gender. So that's also, again, new language that you might want to think about. Doesn't have to be written in here, but that'll be something that to think about moving forward too.
Okay, I'll look into that.
And let me know if you want to talk about that anymore with me too.
Okay.
Number 6 is gender expression. So this is about how you communicate externally out to the world. So gender identity is how you feel on the inside. And so this is really about your clothes, your grooming, your behavior. Does it feel feminine, masculine, fluid, neutral, don't know, all of it, none of it? It's really up to you how you want to answer this one.
I mean, for me, it really depends on the day. Like some days I feel like I'm feminine and some days I feel very like not, but like not masculine, like more like in the middle. Like I guess like a word would be like androgynous.
Yeah, absolutely. I can just write that in. That's perfect.
Yeah.
And then number 7, on your birth certificate, do you know how you were identified at birth?
Yeah, I believe I was female at birth.
Okay. Perfect. And then this might be a new term also. Do you know, or do you identify as being intersex? That's when the body is born with both male and female physical parts.
I don't think I am.
Okay. The number 8 is, have you had any experience with the following? This is about housing. So either homelessness on your own or with family, foster care, juvenile justice, none of the above, or any other system.
So I don't live at home right now. Does that mean I'm homeless technically?
Technically it could, but you're staying with a friend, so you have a home that you could go back to.
I was
although
staying in
I know that
before I got with my friend though. So I guess I was homeless.
Okay.
I am homeless. And then definitely after Dad passed away, that was hard. And we with Mom, we were homeless when I was younger.
Right. I think you stayed in your car for a while, if I remember right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We'll just indicate those then. You doing okay?
Yeah. It's heavy, but it's okay.
It's heavy. Yeah. We're almost done. So the last 2 questions are actually really open-ended questions. So, and they're really about, when do you most or least feel comfortable being yourself? So kind of be with your friends now, you're probably feeling more comfortable, whereas with your mom, you're feeling less comfortable, as an example. So where do you feel the most comfortable, Sage?
So I feel the most comfortable with my brother. He's really accepting. Eddie, he's really, really accepting of me. And then I feel least comfortable when I'm at home with Mom. She just doesn't get it. So
that's very real. Thank you for that.
Mm.
And then, are there any services or resources you want to be connected to?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about my future, and my brother has said that he's planning to go to college, so I just don't really know what's out there for me right now. So more stuff about that, I guess. I'm a little behind in school right now, so maybe help with that. And then a lot of this is just really hard, and I don't really know who really to talk to. School counselors are fine, but they just I don't know, they're just like really busy and they like focus mostly on the school, and I don't want to like overburden my friends with like what I'm going through. But also like I don't know how to like deal with what's happening. I don't know. And so maybe like I don't know, like a therapist or a counselor would be like kind of cool. I don't know how to pay for that or anything like that, but like that would be really helpful for me.
Okay. Yeah, I think that we can definitely find some resources to support you that way. There's just like you and I are on the video, so there's a lot of telehealth that's happening now too. So that's something to just kind of keep in mind, that we could help find you a provider and you could meet this way. And there's also some great LGBTQ, and I guess I made a leap when I assumed that, but there's some great LGBTQ resources in town that specifically work with teens and young adults. And so that might be, if that's something you want to continue to talk about or develop and explore, we could look at accessing them as a resource. I've got some good friends that work there and I'm familiar with that. So it wouldn't just be like, here's Sage, here's a number, call it. But if you're interested, we could call it together. We'll set that up together too.
Okay, so stop sharing my screen. What did we think? What did Day do well? What did we like about that? Where's the chat? And Nicholas, while we're having this discussion, if you want to pull the PowerPoint back up. Oh, sorry, my chat just went away. That happened. I liked how the therapist related the questions back to herself. Yep. I liked how she asked how she was doing during the interview. Yep, emotionally checking in. She kept the questions open, followed your lead in answering them. Absolutely. The worker did an excellent job making her feel comfortable and being transparent / easy to talk to. I like the pausing and checking in after a few questions to make sure everything was still comfortable. Explain terms really well. Yep, these are all good things. Gave an open door to come back and revisit. Absolutely. SOGIE is always and forever will be a lifelong process. Always keep that door open. Some other things, Day did a lot of parroting, a lot of tone matching. The check-in, yep, absolutely. So we show an example because I think a lot of people are like, well, I don't really have like a jumping off point. I don't really know exactly where to go from here. And so we just wanted to give you all an example before we get into our actual practice. So Nicholas, if you want to go ahead and go to the next slide. So we're going to actually spend some time together in breakout groups today, actually doing what Day and I just did. We'll be in groups of 3. So you're going to get into your groups of 3 and each person is going to select a profile. These profiles were sent to you via email. They're one of the documents that was in the attachment. It's the SOGIE practice activity. You'll spend a couple minutes reviewing your role. Each person takes a role. So there's the interviewer, the interviewee, and an observer. Using the questionnaire, the interviewer interviews the interviewee, observer observes, and you can and then you divide up the questions. Then you discuss, and then you kind of go through this process of like, how did it feel? What went well? What could have gone better? What did you observe? How did it feel to actually do the questionnaire? And so this is what we're going to be doing in this group of 3. The reason why we give you profiles is, and just a caveat on the profiles, they are researched and they come from like young people with like direct experience. We don't want to potentially put we don't want stereotypes, and we don't want you all to feel at risk to have to perform or put yourself in that position. So that's why we use these profiles. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and put you all into breakout rooms. Are there any questions before we get started?
Lily, I wanted to add, just because we're a little limited on time, I'm wondering if folks maybe want to just pick one profile to use in their group to just sort of simplify, and then maybe just take a few questions and then do a switch and do the next few questions and then do a switch, because I think it's going to take too long to do the whole one. That's just a suggestion for getting folks to, it might be an easier way to do that. Because you said 12 minutes, right?
Yeah, you all will have about 12 minutes to do this.
So that's just a thought.
Yeah, feel free to divide it how you want, but like think about those questions that you're feeling uncomfortable asking, and like really practice, the way that you're going to do that. If there's anything, how are you going to approach it, and what questions are you feeling the most uncomfortable with? Are there any other questions before we open up the breakout rooms? All right, in that case, we're going to go ahead and open them up, and we will see you all in 12 minutes. Alex and Rhonda and Jay, are you all in your breakout rooms? Gina, Rhonda? Jay and Rhonda, you're in room 6, and this is where you have a person who's in there. Are you joining breakout rooms, or should I move that person?
I'm just going to scroll through these slides, Lily, to see what we.
Yeah, please. I think we can skip the resources because we did that yesterday.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I think so too.
Yeah,
okay.
We can make mistakes fast. I want them to be able to have.
Sure. No, I understand.
I'm practicing. Sheila and Diana, it looks like you all are not assigned to a breakout room. Do you want me to put you in a breakout room?
Yes, I lost internet connection, if you could.
Yes, I absolutely can. I'm going to go ahead and
Oh,
put
sorry.
you in breakout room 2. Wait, sorry, Sheila. I'm actually going to put you in a different one. I'm going to put you in breakout room 11.
Okay.
You should have an invitation now. Yay, okay. Gina, you don't have audio in your breakout room. Oh no, where are you, Gina? Huh, that's weird. Gina, are you here with me right now? Can you hear me? Okay. I just sent you a message, Gina, but I don't see you in the actual breakout room. It didn't look like the invitation was accepted. You're still in the main room with myself and Nicholas. Oh, you left the room and came back. Okay.
How much longer do we have, Lily?
We have about 5 more minutes.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
Gina, do you think it's worth trying to go back into a room? Or are you okay? I'm just like listening to folks. Or do you want to just hang out here? You're going to try to go back in. It looks like you were assigned to room 11. And it still looks like you haven't accepted. So I can move you to a different room. I can move you to room 8 maybe, if you can't see your invitation. And give people a 2-minute warning. Oh, good. It looked like it worked. That's good. Okay. Give folks a minute and then I will call them back. Diana, welcome back. It looks like you weren't able, what happened with your breakout room? All right, I'm gonna close the rooms. Welcome back, everybody. We're just waiting for people to come back from their breakout room.
Okay. All right. And we're done.
How was that for everyone? How did it go? The act of doing, how was it?
So this is Michelle Hess, and I'll just be transparent. We didn't do the questionnaire because I wasn't organized enough to have it up on my screen. But we did have a conversation around that. I'm the supervisor for the Legally Free unit in Spokane at DCYF. And my workers are already naturally having these conversations kind of throughout their practice with the children and youth. And so, so I guess I'm just wondering, like, what is the expectation with respect to this questionnaire? Do I have to expect that my workers are going to move away from these natural conversations that they've incorporated into their practice and use the questionnaire? You know, what's that going to look like?
Yeah, I think that that's entirely dependent on your site. Oh, okay. And I would connect with Rich, honestly, about that question and conversation. But from CCYJ standpoint, like, we don't ever want to interrupt a good thing if you got it going. Our hope, though, is that, you know, if there's a way to be able to translate what's happening naturally to the questionnaire so that we can capture that data, that would be something that, you know, we would love to work with you all on figuring out how to navigate. Because if your workers are already able, confident, doing it, that's amazing. I think the thing that we want to link is that data piece too.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Nicholas, if you
I
have.
want to jump in on there because I think there's a more sort of general concern that you're expressing, and that is that there have been folks that have been doing this sort of as part of natural conversations. We've heard that a lot. What we struggle with is then, you know, we don't want to disrupt that, like Lily said, but at the same time, you know, if we leave it to them and discretion, then it's great that they're doing it, but then not all youth are going to have access. So our intention is to sort of standardize this, and it is a pilot. We're just figuring out how to do that. And so to the extent that we can merge the two, like I think what Lily was alluding to, that would be, I think, optimal. But yeah, I think that it's great that those folks are doing it, and we really applaud them. The problem is all the other folks who are not doing it, and there's no system in place to ensure that happens. And so that's what the long-term goal there is.
So if I can jump into Michelle, this is Rich. The next goal is, now that all of Spokane Central has received the training, I want to sit down with the supervisors and John Knott and talk about how we move forward with the youth and getting the SOGIE questionnaire administered to kids, and how that will look, Michelle. So John and I talked yesterday about, we're going to craft an email to the soups about the next steps for Spokane Central for the safe and affirming care. So.
Okay, sounds good.
Great. There was some other comments about how it was good to practice with a group. Absolutely. Don't let this be your last practice too. If you're in a place where you have like staff meetings, this can also be like an icebreaker. Please feel free to keep up the practice. Are there any other comments before we move forward with the last few comments that we have? Okay, great. Let's go ahead.
So we only have about 6 minutes left, so we're going to just go through these quickly. So these are some of the things that have come up, responses that you might get. I mean, it's so specific, these and sort of determining how to respond. But, some general things, why are you asking me this? Really falling back on the, this is a matter of practice we ask all youth. And so that, we're not trying to single you out. We're not making an assumption about you. In fact, we're trying to counter assumptions by asking all youth. It's none of your business. That goes back to the purpose. And of course, if it's still none of our business because the youth says so, then it's none of our business and they don't need to do it. I'm straight, that goes back again to the purpose of we're not making assumptions. A silence and a look, I think I'll really defer to those who have much more experience with direct practice working with young people and how to address that and move past that. It's been a little while since I've had youth clients, but I think that's more of an engagement piece than necessarily an LGBTQ specific piece. And what are you going to do with this? Well, that goes back to the informed consent. And what about you? Are you gay? And I think that this really is also sort of context specific, the extent to which you want to share. Certainly, some partners they actually ask the young person, do you want to be with a queer identified provider, like within our organization? And so the providers are very happy being out, and there is that sort of match. Other folks may not want that. So I think that's also context specific, and that's something that we could consult on, if that comes up or whatnot. The resources we went over yesterday, but there are resource maps, and we'll send you the link again in the follow-up email. And then this is Lily's last lesson in just a few minutes.
Yeah, so this is you will make mistakes along the way. Go ahead and to the next slide. Nicholas, you're frozen. Oh no, Nicholas is frozen. Okay, so that being said, basically we are under the idea that like no one is perfect. There is no such thing as like a perfect practice. Like in direct service, it's about relationship with the young person. And I think that we all have the capacity to make mistakes. And, especially when you're referring with someone SOGIE, that's going to happen. So this lesson is really about like, what do I do if I do make mistakes? And the biggest thing that we can say is, acknowledging that you made a mistake if you catch yourself, apologizing, repairing that relationship, and then truly it's about moving forward. If in the moment you find yourself making a mistake, it's okay to repair that. But if you're the person who's like, I'm so sorry, or like gets really, really like uncomfortable with it, that then puts that emotional labor on the young person, and we just don't want that. So if you find yourself making mistakes, it's okay to apologize. It's okay to move forward, and just really make sure that we're repairing. That being said, though, don't keep making the mistake. Learn from your mistake, right? And that's going to be the really important piece. So with our last 3 minutes, it looks like Nicholas's connectivity just kind of kicked him off. Are there any last questions, comments, anything that you all want to share with us before we depart today? Okay, great. Well, in that case, I'm going to go ahead and say thank you so much for letting us train with you all. And please, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. I'm planning to send an email that has all of this follow-up information. And Rich, I will be reaching out to you for additional follow-up as well. So I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day and have a wonderful weekend that's coming up. and we'll see you all later.
Okay.